Hi, everyone. Welcome to the University of Maine Cooperative Extension's Preserving the Maine Harvest webinar. I'm Lori Bowen, and we will also be joined today by three other colleagues, Lisa Fishman, Kathy Savoy, and Kate McCarty. Collectively, we have over 30 years delivering home food preservation workshops, and we're excited to be back with another session of research-based preserving information. The mission of UMaine Cooperative Extension is to help Maine people improve their lives through an educational process that uses research-based, knowledge-focused on issues and needs. Our educational programs include agriculture, horticulture, including master gardeners, 4-H youth development, food safety, and nutrition. And finally, we want to let you know that the University of Maine is prohibited from discriminating on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, disability, and reprisal or retaliation for prior civil rights activity. These webinars are designed to provide you with current USDA recommendations for preserving food at home. And today we will focus on an introduction to the boiling water bath method of canning. We do have our webinar set up so that you can hear and see us, but we can't hear or see you. We will have time for questions throughout our presentation, and you can ask a question by selecting Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen and typing your question into that box. Please use the Q&A feature, not the chat box. So thanks for joining us, and let's get started with a poll. And we want to know, what are you looking to learn about boiling water bath canning? And you can check any that apply. So first off, A, what equipment do I need? B, what makes it safe? C, what products can I process with it? And D, how does it work? And let's see here. So the results look like, oh my goodness, the majority of folks want to know what makes it safe. And that's a great option to pick right there. About 40%, what equipment do I need? And 80%, what products can I process with it? And 40%, how does it work? All right, thanks for participating in that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Lori. Those are great results on that poll. It definitely steers us in the right direction today. So boiling water bath canning is a popular way to preserve your acidic Maine-grown produce for year-round use. The process creates a shelf-stable product that is best used within 1 year for best quality. In a nutshell, this process involves cleaned and sometimes sterilized glass canning jars and filling them with food to a recommended level, screwing on the 2-part canning lid and fully submerging the jars into boiling water. Once the water returns to a boil, you boil them for a recommended amount of time. Turn off the heat and then let the jars sit for 5 minutes in the boiling water bath before removing the jars, letting them cool, and voila, a vacuum forms inside the jar, which seals the lid onto the jar. The science behind boiling water bath processing is that the heat from the boiling water heats your food to the point where many of the molds, yeast, and bacteria that can cause spoilage and foodborne illnesses are killed off. The vacuum seal forms when the food in the jars expands and pushes the air in the jar out. This vacuum also prevents germs that need oxygen from growing, as well as preserves the quality of your food by preventing oxidation. Let's talk about some of the specific issues related to safety of home canned food using a boiling water bath. The boiling water bath is only recommended for foods that are what we call high acid. This means that the food has a pH of 4.6 or less. pH is a measure of the acidity or alkalinity and is represented by a scale of 0 to 14. For the purposes of home canning, we divide foods into two categories, the high acid and the low acid. High acid foods have a pH of 4.6 or less, while low acid foods have a pH of greater than 4.6. Hopefully you can see on this slide that high acid foods include jams, jellies, other fruit products, pickles, relishes, chutney, and some tomato products, including salsa. These foods are either naturally acidic or have added acid, like bottled lemon juice or vinegar. They can all be canned using a boiling water bath canner. You can also see on this pH chart that low acid foods are plain vegetables, meaning they're not pickled, and anything with meat in it also is a low acid food. pH is important to home canning because of the risks associated with botulism. Botulism is a foodborne illness from a toxin that can form in improperly canned foods. If left untreated, it can be fatal. It comes from C. botulinum spores that can grow into the toxin when given the right conditions. These conditions are low acid environment, room temperature environment, plenty of moisture, a lack of oxygen, basically the inside of a canning jar. To top it all off, you can't see it, smell it, or taste it. So the only way you know your food was contaminated with botulism is when you become sick from it. These little botulinum spores are very tough, and they can survive the temperature of boiling water. So when you are canning low acid foods, you must use a pressure canner, which gets up to much hotter temperatures, say 240 to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, which will destroy any botulinum spores. So the takeaway here is to pressure can your vegetables, pressure can low acid foods and not use a boiling water bath canner. If you follow a recommended canning recipe and use proper canning techniques to can high acid foods, you won't have to worry about botulism in your home canned foods. That's why a lot of beginning canners start with boiling water bath canning. It's a relatively simple method that doesn't involve a lot of specialty equipment and results in delicious, high quality home canned goods like jams, pickles, and salsas. So let's have another poll and we'll check your understanding about high acid and low acid foods. So of the following, which cannot be processed safely in a boiling water bath canner? Jams, tomatoes, green beans, applesauce, or I'm really not sure. And we'll give you a few more seconds to fill that poll out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's check out the results. And we're going to see that mostly green beans, because they're a plain garden vegetable, are going to be the culprits here. Those green beans are going to require a pressure canner unless you're turning them into an acidified product like a pickle. Tomatoes, for the most part, are fairly acidic and they can be safely processed in a boiling water bath canner, as are jams, as long as there's a high enough acid component to them. So with jams, most fruits are naturally acidic and they can safely be canned in that boiling water bath canner. And tomatoes, something like a salsa, which is a tomato product with acidification to it, added to it in the form of vinegar, those are going to be safe. And sometimes we recommend that people use lemon juice or vinegar to can their tomatoes to make those a safe product to put in the boiling water bath canner as well. But definitely green beans are going to need to be in a pressure canner. They are a very low acid product. Okay. And then we want to also ask another question of you, and we want to know what bacteria is of the greatest concern in home canned foods. Is it Salmonella, Listeria, C. botulinum. There are no bacteria in canned foods, or I'm really not sure. And we'll give you a couple seconds to fill out that question. Oh, and look at you all. Look at you jumping right in there. You're absolutely right. C. botulinum is the bacteria that we are definitely most concerned about in our home canned goods. And that's why you're in this class today, to learn how to make your home canned foods safe, and so that they don't have any of that C. botulinum. Excellent. We're going to check in with Lori really quickly right now to see if we have any questions that have come up so far.
We don't so far, but I do want to encourage everyone to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A as they come up, and we'll have another break for questions shortly.
Excellent. So we're going to start talking about some of the equipment you'll need to safely can using the boiling water bath method. The very first thing you're going to need is a boiling water bath canner. This is a big pot with a rack in the bottom that is deep enough to fully submerge your jars in the water, with at least 1 to 2 inches of water covering the tops, and an additional 1 to 2 inches of water so the boiling water doesn't spill over. Space, I should say, not water. The rack helps to keep the jars off the hot metal surface, which could cause your jars to break as they boil. The rack also helps keep the water circulating around the jars to help the heat penetrate the jar. You can purchase a relatively inexpensive canner, say $20 to $25, that comes with a rack in the bottom and is nice and deep, usually at hardware stores, big box stores, or online retailers. You can also make a boiling water bath canner out of a pot you already have handy, such as a lobster pot or corn steamer. You just need a rack that fits in the bottom, like a round cake cooling rack or a trivet. Ball now makes a silicone rack that will fit in the bottom of any 9-inch pot you may have, and you can see that located here on the left, that black silicone rack. You may see some advice that says you can use screw bands to act as a rack, but in our experience, it's not very effective. The jars become very unstable and can tip over during the processing. So it's best to find a dedicated rack that fits securely in the bottom of your canner. Ball also started making an electric boiling water bath canner in 2015. It's the most expensive option for this type of canning. It's going to run about $120, but it's a really nice appliance. You don't have to heat up your whole kitchen as much as when you're using your stovetop and you have that big pot of boiling water coming at you. And it has a really handy spigot, which makes draining the water out after you're finished processing a whole lot easier. This electric boiling water bath canner might be a great option for anyone who has a glass top stove. Now, there are some potential concerns for canning on a glass top stove, namely that the heat from the large canning pot can damage your stove by causing the glass to crack or discolor around the burner. So if you have a flat glass top stove and you want to can, your first check should be to see if your model is safe to can on. Call the manufacturer or check the appliance website to be sure. If you are cleared by the manufacturer to can on a glass stovetop, be sure to find a boiling water bath canner that has a flat bottom. And you can see in this picture here that the typical granite ware black one on the left has ridges around the bottom that does not allow the pot to come in full contact with that flat top stove, whereas the canner pictured on the right of stainless steel has that flat bottom that you're looking for. So you want to have good contact between the canner and the heating element to ensure that you get the full rolling boil that is necessary for boiling water bath canning. You'll want to find a canning pot that is not larger than the diameter of your burner on your flat top stove, as that will help to prevent any damage to the top of your stove. If you cannot can on your glass top stove, you can always buddy up with a friend or a family member. You can purchase an induction burner that you can use for canning, or you can use the electric boiling water bath canner that we showed in the previous slide. Another important topic to cover is headspace. You can see in this picture that headspace is that pocket of air between the top of your product and the top of the canning jar. In general, we're talking about a 1/4 inch for jams and jellies, about a 1/2 inch for fruits, tomatoes, and pickles, and 1 to 1.5 inches for pressure canned items like meats and vegetables. Make sure to always use a tested recipe. Too much headspace will result in a weak vacuum seal. Too little headspace may force food under the lid, which may cause a failed seal. Headspace matters when it comes to creating a safe, shelf-stable product. Altitude matters too. You must make adjustments for higher altitudes, defined as 1,000 feet or more above sea level. Water boils at lower temperatures as altitude increases. Lower boiling temperatures are less effective for killing bacteria. So increasing the processing time or the canner pressure compensates for lower boiling temperatures. If you live in Maine and you do not know your altitude, you can use our elevation by county resource to figure it out. This will be included in the resources that are emailed to you after this webinar. Let's talk about sterilizing jars. We frequently get asked the question, do I need to sterilize my jars? Well, the answer depends on how long your tested recipe calls for processing. If the recipe calls for 10 minutes or more of processing, then you do not need to sterilize your jars. You just want to make sure they're clean and you keep them warm prior to filling them. If your recipe calls for less than 10 minutes of processing time, then you do need to sterilize. You can sterilize your clean jars by boiling them for 10 minutes. Now we get to the fun part of talking about canning jars. The recommended style of canning jars is the typical glass mason jar you're probably all quite familiar with. These jars are tempered to withstand the temperatures of boiling water and repeated heating and cooling. They can be used, reused, and reused and reused as long as they're not chipped or cracked. You can buy them where canning supplies are typically sold: grocery stores, hardware stores, big box stores, online retailers. Jars that are no longer recommended include the wire bale jars. You'll see that on the left. Reused commercial jars like jam jars, mayonnaise jars, or baby food jars. You can see one of those located in the front. Jars with a zinc cap. The picture in the back to the right has that old-fashioned zinc cap that is not recommended. And you can see another type of a wire bale jar on the right that's kind of like a hinged lid. Those look fancy, those look pretty. Those are not recommended for canning. They're better off to store your dry goods. They look great with a bunch of lentils or split peas in them, but not your home canned goods. The lids that we are recommending for canning have two parts: the flat dome lid itself and the screw band. The dome lid, and that's going to be just about in the center to the right. You see where that green check mark is. There's the flip side with the white center and the red band around it. The dome lid has a food grade plastic liner, the white part, that Ball now makes BPA free. And there's a button in the middle, and you can't quite see it in this picture on that silver lid on the right. The angle is not quite right on that, but there is a little button right in the middle of that lid. And that will pull in when the vacuum seal is formed in that jar. And that's a great visual indicator that your jar has sealed and it's safe for long-term storage. If the button is not depressed 24 hours after canning, you know you need to take action like reprocessing, refrigerating, or freezing your jar of food. Lids are recommended for one-time use only. as the sealing compound. And you can see on that lid on the right with the white plastic liner, that red sealing compound running around the edge. That gets compromised after it's used, and it can become smushed during storage, and it might not seal the next time around. So those are recommended for one use only. So it's fortunate that the lids are inexpensive, and you can see the boxes that they are marketed in. So when you go to the store, you can look for just those lids in those small green boxes, either wide mouth or regular mouth sizes. Fortunately, lids, they're not expensive. They're available next to the canning jars. So once you buy a case of jars, you'll only need to buy new lids each time you want to can, not the jars, the lids, and the screw bands. The screw bands themselves are also reusable, so check to make sure they're not dented or rusted before using them. Bands can be removed and stored separately after canning, as they can trap moisture, they can rust on, they can hide signs of spoilage in your jars. So we recommend removing them, washing and drying thoroughly, and storing in between canning processes. We're going to slip into the demonstration kitchen right now, and we are going to visit with Kate, who is going to show you how to make some delicious dilly beans. Take it away, Kate.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to go into the things that I did behind the scenes while Lisa and Lori were overviewing all that information, and put it into action here, but tell you what I did to get set up. So Kathy and I prepared all the food and equipment together. What we did was we filled the canner about halfway, 2/3, because we're doing pint jars, with water. We washed our jars, put them in the canner, and brought the whole thing to a boil. And that's because I'm going to be demonstrating making dilly beans here today, so pickled green beans. And this is a recipe that does require sterilizing your jars. So the recipe is canned for 5 minutes, which means that the jars need to be sterilized ahead of time by boiling them for 10. So if you have a recipe that's canned for 10 minutes or longer, the jars become sterile while you're canning. But as you can see with dilly beans, they're only canned for 5 minutes, which means it is one of relatively few recipes where you need to sterilize your jars first. So again, the jars are in there upright. They have been washed ahead of time, covered with water, brought to a boil. When it achieved a boil, I timed it for 10 minutes, which was a while ago now, and it's still boiling. So these jars are very sterile. And then other things I did was to wash up and prep some green beans, so just trim them. And then we have all our other spices ready to go. And then I made a brine as well. So the brine is the flavor additive, the liquid, pickling liquid that adds all those flavors. So it's half water and half vinegar. We're going to send you the recipe for this 4-jar batch. I think this, whatever, however much it is, it was 4 cups of vinegar and 4 cups of water and half a cup of salt. And I'm blanking on how many jars that makes. But again, we're going to send you the recipe, and I'm going to show you how to make 4 right now. So I just use plain white vinegar. You can use any kind of vinegar you want, as long as it's a 5% acidity. And because that acidity has to do with the pH of the recipe, that means that it's there for safety. So just do a little label check when you purchase your vinegar, and make sure that it says on there 5% acidity. We have seen some in the stores that aren't 5%. And then I use a pickling and canning salt. This is sold with canning supplies, and it is just pure salt. So no additives like iodine, which could make or an anti-caking agent, which could make your pickles turn colors or the brine appear cloudy, which can also be a sign of spoilage. So you want to avoid using table salt and just get this pickling and canning salt, so that when your pickles are finished, they look nice and beautiful on the shelves, and you don't confuse any color changes with spoilage. All right, so those are all my ingredients that I got here. So I think I'm ready. Oh, I also have my screw bands and lids washed and ready here to go. So I think I can jump to filling jars with our overhead cam. All right. So I'm going to use my jar lifter to take the 1 jar out of the canner. I'm just going to start with 1 and have the other ones I'm not using stay in the canner so they remain warm. I'm also going to bring my brine over to my filling station. So I'm putting these jars on this baking rack because they were hot in the canner. And if I were to put them right on the counter, you do run the risk that they could break, especially if you have stone countertops or a metal prep table. So this will help protect them. Once the jars have been heated up, just work on something like this. You could also use a baking sheet with a clean dish towel on it. So for this recipe, we're preparing what's known as a raw pack, which means you have raw ingredients going into the jar. So you might see that language in canning recipes, a raw pack or a hot pack. And we're using fresh dill heads. So Kathy went to the farmer's market this morning. This time of year, you can find the flowering head of a dill plant. And you can add that instead of the dried dill seed that the recipe calls for. I just use one flower head instead of the teaspoon of dill seed it calls for. And then I'm adding some crushed red pepper for a little bit of spiciness. This is optional, so if you don't like it spicy, you can leave it out. You can also add more if you want spicier pickles. And then we've got our beans here trimmed. These were just trimmed for like taking the ends off. So as I place them into the jar, I need to be conscious of the 1/2-inch headspace. So that means that every bean has to be 1/2 inch from the rim of the jar. The little shorty ones is fairly obvious that they're nowhere near the top of the jar, so they can go right in. But if you have a longer bean, I think these are the jade variety Kathy was saying. So some of these can be, 5 or 6 inches long. You want to use this Headspace measuring tool. These are in that 3-piece canning kit that all sells. They're pretty widely available at grocery stores, hardware stores. It has little notches on the end that measure 1/4 inch. So the headspace, or amount of space you leave at the top of the jar for dilly beans, is 1/2 inch. So I'm resting this tool on the rim of the jar on the second step up from the bottom. So that measures 1/2 inch. And that should be clear of any beans. So I'm just gonna slice these up so that they all fit. And I do happen to know that each bean is gonna need to be 4 inches to meet that headspace in a pint jar. So if you have a ruler, or Kathy had these neat little mats that had a ruler printed on them, cutting mats up at the top, you could just cut all your beans to 4 inches, which is pretty handy. And we often get questions about different varieties of beans. So yes, you can use different varieties of beans. The yellow ones make for a nice variety when you're filling the jars. And then the purple ones are fun as well, but the purple ones do lose their color when they're cooked. So they kind of turn like a greenish brown. So they'll look better raw than after they've been processed in the boiling water bath canner. So dilly beans truly are a labor of love because they are kind of tedious, is maybe too negative of a word, but they border on it when you're filling these jars with beans. Maybe I'll just do one for the sake of time, but. Okay. So when you're packing pickles, you want to pack the vegetables in as firmly as you can, but not to the point where they're going to be breaking when you're shoving the last bean in. So the more you can get in, the better. Obviously, then you have more pickles per jar and you use up more beans per canner load. But there just comes a point where as you're stuffing the beans in, they'll kind of start to bend and break as you meet resistance from all the other spots. But you can put as many in there as you can. These are a little bit hardier than cucumbers, which is definitely why I prefer to make them as a pickle. Cucumbers, you can see if you're shoving a cucumber spear in like that, it's gonna get a little more damage than a green bean, which will maintain its integrity a little better, both as you're filling the jar and then as you cook it. Okay, I think I'm nearing the end of space in here. Oh, see, that one just snapped. And it's okay if you put little pieces in there too. They can just be little nibblers of pickles once you're done. All right, so we're gonna call this one the last 1. All right, and I'll check my Headspace. Pretty good job. Some of these tall boys over here need decapitated a little more. Okay. All right, so 1/2 inch Headspace on all my beans on this jar, check. Now, if we were doing the rest of these jars, we would continue this same process of filling the jars again and again until they were all full. For the canner load, you can fit 8 pints in there, so you could do 8 pint jars at a time. I think for the sake of time, we will just call it with 1. So this is my canning funnel that helps me get all of my brine into the jar and not all over the counter. So few bits out of here. Okay. So I'm going to ladle this pickling liquid over the jar. And this process is very similar for many high acid products that you can in the boiling water bath canner. So you could have tomatoes in here and you could be adding water or juice. You could have fruit pieces like peach halves or pear halves or other fruits, and then be adding, again, water, juice, or a simple syrup. And once you're up to the 1/2 inch Headspace of liquid, which again, I will measure. The big thing about this raw pack where you have pieces of vegetable in the jar or fruit or tomatoes, and then you put a liquid over it, is that you need to remove the bubbles. So we did such a nice job of putting all the beans in there nice and tight. So surely there's some trapped air down at the bottom of the jar where we've packed the beans in tightly. And so you'll use the other end of your Headspace measuring tool. You could also use a plastic takeout knife or a wooden chopstick, something non-metallic, to kind of just gently rearrange everyone and make sure the pickling liquid has filled in around all the veggies. And then double check the Headspace. And I did lose a little bit of liquid into those bubble spaces. If you skip this step and you packed your beans in really tightly and you have trapped air in there, what will happen is that that trapped air could cause the jar to break because it's going to want to get out during the canning process and it's going to go out one way or another. So we're just going to free the bubbles before we put this jar into the canner. I double checked the Headspace, topped it off a little more. Some of the beans are floating, which is a thing they tend to do. But again, I'm confident that I measured my 1/2 inch beans and my 1/2 inch liquid Headspace. So now we're ready to wipe the rim off and apply the lid. We'll wipe the rim with just a clean paper towel. And this is just wiping the top of the jar, the sealing surface where the lid makes contact, making it free of any dill seed or pickling liquid that might prevent the seal from forming. With a pickling brine, there's not too much that's going to prevent it from sealing, but if you're making like a chunky salsa or a sticky jam or something, it's really important to pay good attention to that rim of the jar. And then one lid, make sure you get one, they stick together. So just make sure one is on there. And then tighten your screw band until it's fingertip tight. So what that language means is it's not using the strength of your whole hand, because then you can over tighten the jar. So we're just putting this screw band on there until I meet resistance, and I'm only using my fingers. So there's really only so tight you can get it using just your fingers. And again, we want the air to escape during the canning process. So if you over tighten the ring, it could cause the jar to break or the lid to buckle. So leave your air and escape route. And then your one jar is ready to go back in the canner. So use your jar lifter to place this into the canner, and then repeat for all the jars till you're out of beans and brine, and then bring your canner back to a full rolling boil. So apply the lid to help you do that. Turn the heat up on the canner. Once you're at a full rolling boil in the canner, you'll start your 5-minute processing time for pickles or for dilly beans here. Once the 5-minute processing time is up, you'll do that 5-minute cool down step. So you'll turn the heat of the stove off, remove the lid, let the jar sit in there for an additional 5 minutes, and then use your jar lifter to take the jars out and put them back onto the cooling rack. So I got a jar of pickled fiddleheads that we did back in May when fiddleheads were available. So we can do some TV magic and pretend this is my processed jar of beans that I'm pulling out. And I would let this jar cool for 12 to 24 hours. So this allows the contents to return to room temperature and for that vacuum seal to fully form. So come back in at least 12 hours. If they aren't sealed, wait the full 24 and check for seals. So the seals can be determined by making sure there's no play in that button on the lid of the jar, that it's pulled in, that you can't press it down with your finger. And then when you determine they're all sealed, you can remove the screw bands for storage, wipe the jars off with a damp paper towel if they have salty or hard mineral rime left on it. And then you can label and date it with just your Sharpie right on the lid. So this is Pickled Fiddleheads, May 2021. Just the name of the product and the date is sufficient. And then those jars are ready to store. So should you come back and find that 1 or 2 jars didn't seal, your options then are that you could actually reprocess the jar, which is not something I'd recommend with pickles because the product might become overcooked. So I would just put it in the refrigerator and then eat it within 2 weeks, like it's a jar you just opened, because it is still fresh, delicious food that you pickled. If you wanted to process it, just apply a new lid before it goes through the canner, because that was likely the problem, was the lid. All right, I think I covered everything I need to. In the name of time, oh, I do want to mention to you that this is a recipe that can also be canned using an atmospheric steam canner, which is an older technology, but one that is seeing a resurgence because the research has been vetted and it supports this method of canning. So we did a whole webinar on atmospheric steam canning last year. And so when we send you the resources, we'll include the link to that as a method. So you can check that out if you're curious or if you already own one and want to know how to can dilly beans in it. All right, so now we are off to Lori for a poll.
Thanks, Kate. We do have another poll coming up. It's time to check your understanding. And our next poll is, how high should water be in a boiling water bath canner? First choice is 1/2 inch above the jar lids, at least 1 to 2 inches above the jar lids, up to the neck of the jar, 3 inches in the bottom of the canner, or I'm not sure. Okay, those answers are coming in, and it looks like that everyone picked option 2, which is at least 1 to 2 inches above the jar lids, which is absolutely correct. And now we are going to send it back to Lisa.
Thanks, Lori. So Kate just touched on a method that we used to not recommend, the atmospheric steam pressure canner, that now is seeing a resurgence because the science does support that method of canning as being an acceptable method. So we're going to talk a few minutes here about some other canning methods that may have been around for a while that have not made a resurgence, that are not vetted, and that we cannot recommend as safe methods of canning. One of those methods is the open kettle method, and that involves pouring hot food into jars, just like Kate did, and putting the lid on, and then just leaving the food there to cool down and form a seal. So this method does not adequately destroy the molds or the yeast or the bacteria that are living in that product. It does not drive air out of the jars in order to create a strong vacuum. And it's not processed in any method at all. It just sits on the counter. It's not been submerged in hot water to make sure that that entire product is heated evenly. So because of those reasons, open kettle canning is not considered a safe method of canning. Similarly, inversion canning, which is filling jars with a hot product, applying the lid, and then turning them upside down to cool completely before flipping them back over and checking for seals. That also does not adequately destroy the molds, the yeast, the bacteria. It does not drive air out of the jars to create a strong vacuum seal. The jars may seal, but that is not a strong, reliable seal. So again, this is not a method that is research-based, and it is not recommended. Likewise, we can never support any type of oven processing where jars are filled with food and they're placed in an oven at a certain temperature for any number of time. You might wonder why there are no recipes and reliable resources that give processing times for oven processing, because there are none. It's an unsafe method and it is not recommended. There is a high risk of the jars breaking because the jars are not designed to withstand dry heat that comes from oven temperatures. Jars are designed to withstand moist heat when they're submerged in water. The heat from oven canning may not be evenly distributed inside the jars, and that doesn't allow all parts of the food inside those jars to reach a safe temperature. So again, oven processing, no matter what your Aunt Sally tells you to do, or your cousin Becky, don't listen to those well-meaning pieces of advice. Do not can in the oven. Likewise, canning in microwave ovens, canning in dishwashers, those are not reliable methods of canning. We cannot support any information about microwave or dishwasher canning. Electric programmable pressure cookers, also known as the Instant Pot types of cookers, even though they are sometimes marketed as being acceptable for canning, are not. Current research being conducted in Maine and in Georgia confirms that electric programmable pressure cookers do not safely produce a reliable, shelf-stable product. So please do not use your electric programmable pressure cooker for canning. Don't use your slow cooker or your crock pot for your canning. Again, unsafe methods. Don't use canning powders or any other chemicals that are supposed to try to replace heat processing by raising the temperature of your foods. Those are not recommended. And lastly, what grandma used to do was she would always pour a thin layer of paraffin wax on top of her jams and jellies. That is likewise an unsafe practice. We know that the seals are very likely to fail and that product is susceptible to spoilage. And so those are all methods that are out there, and we cannot support any type of use of those methods. Now, hopefully, we'll be able to go to Lori now, and she has your questions ready to be asked.
I'm going to jump right in. We have some great questions, and I want to squeeze as many in as we can. First off, where do baked beans fall in the pH spectrum?
So baked beans are low. Beans are a low acid food, and they need to be pressure canned.
All right.
You need
And next,
we can send you the recipe if you need us to follow up.
thanks. So the next question, I have read in the Ball Book of Canning to add different amounts of water to sterilize depending on the size of the jar. For example, fill half pints with water and 2/3 full for quarts. How important is this? And is it safe to fully fill any size jar with water?
Yeah, so each jar should be fully submerged in the water. So whatever size jar you have, it needs to be fully submerged and then boiled for 10 minutes to be sterilized.
Awesome. Also, if you're canning a whole fruit like a plum, can you use a half-gallon mason jar? Otherwise, I can only put 3 plums in a pint jar.
Oh, yeah. You could go up to a quart size as long as there's a recommendation in the canning recipe for it. But to my knowledge, the only thing that can be safely canned in those half-gallon sizes is fruit juice, not whole fruit. So you could can in quarts. And I understand it is frustrating to have a jar size where you can't get very many in there. That's always how I feel with whole pickles or tomatoes. I'm like, can I get more in there? But you need to use a jar size that has a recommended recipe processing time for it.
Okay, I'm going to squeeze one more question in here. Would we wait to add all of the cans to the pot at the same time?
Yeah, I would, especially with pickles, because I'm like looking at my one little jar that I put in there for the demo, and it's just getting cooked. which is what you want to try and avoid overcooking with your pickles, and they lose their crispiness. So see if you can try and do them all at once, and then add the jars all together so they're evenly cooked.
Okay, so we are almost out of time. You will all be receiving our list of recommended resources. If we did not get to your question, we will respond by email in that follow-up email. And also, if you are interested in our Preserving Coach program, it's been a huge success, and you can contact Kate McCarty and she will set you up with a master food preserver that can provide advice by phone, email, or perhaps even in person. Next month, we will be back on Tuesday, August 10th at noon to discuss preserving tomatoes, including salsa. And we'll share an email with upcoming registrations and resources from today's topic and information on how to be paired with a preserving coach. And an evaluation is going to be included too. And we're offering free Headspace tools to those who complete that evaluation and provide their address. And we are out of time. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you all to our panelists.
Yeah, thank you, and happy canning, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.